My name is Abigail Ruth Weston, born Abigail Ruth Crane on the 4th day of April in the year 1838 in Licking County, Ohio. I am 80 years old. I have seen 7 decades pass across this earth like weather. I have known hunger and abundance, love and its absence, birth and burial in equal measure. I do not speak easily of personal things. I never have. But I am old enough now that silence feels like a waste of the little time remaining, and so I will tell you about the day my childhood ended. Not gradually, the way most childhoods end, all at once, like a door closing in a house you cannot re-enter. I was 11 years old. By the time that summer was finished, I was something else entirely. I have never had a name for what I became, only the knowledge that the girl I had been on the morning of June the 3rd, 1849, was not the same person who went to sleep that night. She was simply gone, and I have been living in her place ever since. But to understand the weight of a single day, you must first understand the life it fell into. My father, Jeremiah Crane, farmed 86 acres in the eastern part of Licking County, 7 miles northeast of Newark, along a creek road that turned to mud for 6 weeks every spring without fail. He was a tall man, unhurried in his movements, with the particular patience of men who have spent their lives negotiating with weather and soil, and neither has ever done what was asked. He grew corn and kept hogs, and traded at the market in Newark twice a year. We were not comfortable people, but we were not frightened people either, and in that time and place, the difference between those two things was smaller than it appears from a distance. My mother, Harriet Crane, née Albright, was the organizing principle of everything. She was the kind of woman who woke before the household and went to sleep after it, who kept a kitchen garden of 1/4 acre entirely by herself, who could calculate to the penny what a season had cost and what it had returned before my father had finished adding the first column. She was not a soft woman. She was a present one. There is a distinction that I have come to value more as I have aged. Soft women may comfort you in the moment. Present women build the thing that holds when the moment passes. We were 4 children in that house. My brother Daniel was the eldest at 15. I came next. Then my sister Louisa, who was 8 that summer, with the kind of cheerful stubbornness that made everyone love her slightly more than was entirely reasonable. And the youngest, my brother Calvin, who was 6 years old and believed wholeheartedly that the creek behind our property was his own personal kingdom, which my father allowed him to believe because some kingdoms cost nothing and return everything. That spring had been a good one. I remember this clearly because good springs in that county were not taken for granted. The corn was up well, the hogs were healthy. My father had taken on a small additional parcel on the eastern edge of our land, 12 acres of bottom land that a neighbor was selling to settle a debt, and he had done it with cash saved across 4 careful years, which was the kind of achievement that does not make noise but carries great weight in a man's shoulders. He was proud, quietly, in the way he was proud of everything, without announcing it to anyone who had not been paying close attention. I had been paying close attention. My mother in those spring months was lighter than I had seen her in some years. She sang sometimes in the kitchen, not loudly, under her breath. Old hymns and 1 or 2 folk songs her own mother had sung in Muskingum County before the family moved west. She let Louisa stay up past her proper hour on warm evenings to sit on the porch and watch the fireflies come up from the fields. She even allowed Calvin to bring a toad he had found by the creek into the kitchen for one afternoon before firmly and without apology returning it to the outdoors. It was a house that felt, in those months, like a house that had arrived somewhere, like the long work had produced its result, and what remained was simply the living of it. I tell you all of this so that you understand precisely what the 3rd of June took. My father rode to Newark that morning on ordinary business. The merchant owed him a settlement from the autumn sale. It was perhaps $3 and some change, a small sum but owed, and therefore worth collecting. He left before I had finished my morning chores. He told my mother he would return by mid-afternoon. He told Daniel to finish mending the fence along the south pasture. He looked at the 4 of us at the breakfast table in the way fathers look at their families on ordinary mornings, without ceremony, without particular tenderness, with the easy confidence of a man who expects to see the same faces again at supper. He did not come home by mid-afternoon. My mother did not alarm easily. She waited until 4 o'clock, then sent Daniel up the road to look. Daniel came back without him. She waited until 6. She stood at the front of the house looking down the road with her arms folded the way she folded them when she was thinking through a problem. She did not look frightened. She looked precise, as though she were organizing information that had not yet fully arrived. They brought my father home at 7:30 in a wagon belonging to a man named Elias Trowbridge, who farmed 2 miles south of town. My father was lying in the bed of the wagon on a piece of canvas. He had been thrown from his horse on the Newark road when the animal shied at something in the roadside brush. He was alive. That must be said plainly. He was alive when they brought him home. But his leg was broken in 2 places below the knee, and he had struck his head against the road with enough force that he was not fully sensible. He did not know my mother's name when she came to the wagon. He looked at her with an expression I have carried in my memory for 69 years. Not blank exactly, simply absent, as though the person who lived behind his eyes had stepped back from the window. He remained in that condition for 11 days. Some hours he knew us, most hours he did not. My mother sat with him through the nights and managed the house through the days with a composure that I did not understand at 11 years old, and have spent the rest of my life trying to adequately measure. She did not weep in front of the children. She did not waste a single word on speculation or despair. She told Daniel what needed doing on the farm, and Daniel did it. She told me what needed doing in the house, and I did it. She gave Louisa the task of keeping Calvin occupied and away from the sick room, which Louisa performed with her characteristic, cheerful determination. We were all of us doing what we were told because the person giving the instructions had decided that was the only way any of us were going to remain standing. My father died on the 14th of June, 1849. He was 41 years old. The leg had not killed him. An infection had settled in the wound and moved through him before the week was out, and the doctor from Newark came twice, and the second time came too late, and said so with the kind of plain honesty that is either cruelty or respect, depending on the constitution of the person receiving it. My mother received it as respect. She thanked him. She showed him to the door. She came back into the room where my father's body lay, and she stood very still for what seemed to me a long time. And then she began to organize what needed to be organized. I watched my mother in those days, and I understood for the first time that grief and duty are not opposites. They are simply two things a person must carry at the same time. My mother was the proof of this. She grieved my father fully. I know this because I saw her in the early mornings before the house woke, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood and her eyes somewhere very far from Licking County, Ohio. She did not hide her grief from the world because she was cold. She contained it in those private hours because the world needed her to be functional inside the daylight, and she was not willing to let the world down. I learned this from watching her. I did not understand it was a lesson at the time. Only later, when I needed it myself, did I recognize what she had been teaching. The childhood ended not the night my father died, but in the morning that followed. My mother called Daniel and me to the kitchen table before the younger ones were awake. She told us plainly what we had and what we did not have. 86 acres, 2 hogs, the corn coming up in the field that my father would not live to harvest, a small debt against the new bottomland parcel, $4 and some change from the Newark merchant that Elias Trowbridge had thought to collect and return to her in a cloth pouch. She laid all of it before us as clearly as a surveyor lays a map. She did not ask us whether we were ready for what was coming. She assumed we were, and the assumption made us so. That morning I became something other than a child. Not a woman yet, not by any reasonable measure, but no longer the girl who had watched fireflies from the porch the week before. Something in between, something without a clean name, something built in a single night out of necessity, and the example of one woman sitting at a kitchen table, laying out facts without flinching. We kept the farm. I want you to understand what that meant. My mother, a woman of 34 years with 4 children ranging from 6 to 15, kept 86 acres of corn and hog country in Licking County, Ohio, through one harvest and then another and then another, until Daniel was old enough to take the primary weight of it. She hired a hand for 2 seasons. She negotiated with the merchant for extended credit with a precision that the merchant later told a neighbor he had rarely encountered in anyone, man or woman. She held every single thing together by the force of her own will and the quality of her attention, and she did not once suggest to any of her children that this was extraordinary. She behaved as though it were simply what the situation required, and therefore what was being done. I am 80 years old. I have been a wife and a mother and a widow myself. I have raised children of my own into a world my mother never saw. I have stood at kitchen tables of my own and laid out facts without flinching, and every single time I have done it, I have known exactly where I learned how. My childhood ended on the 14th of June, 1849. I have no grief about this. A childhood is not a thing you carry into old age. It is a thing you are given for a season, and then you pass out of it, one way or another. Mine ended abruptly and early, and not by anyone's choosing. But what replaced it was not emptiness. What replaced it was instruction, the most complete and honest instruction I have ever received from any source in my 8 decades on this earth. If you are young and you believe your circumstances are more than you can carry, I will not tell you they are not. I do not know your circumstances. What I will tell you is this. There was a woman in Licking County, Ohio, in the summer of 1849, who had less than you likely have right now. And she got up every single morning, and she laid the facts on the table, and she did what was required. She did not ask whether she was equal to it. She simply proceeded as though the question were not relevant. That is what she taught me. That is everything she taught me. And it has been sufficient for 80 years.